Great. Hello and welcome, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started here as a few folks are still logging in. We do want to welcome you to the speaker series, New Directions in Public Gardens, the featured speaker, Paulina Lopez, this evening. I'll start out with just a few announcements, a little bit of an overview. As we get started, as we begin, we do want to take a moment to reflect on the land on which we live and work in the Seattle area. Adjust my slide, excuse me. The University of Washington acknowledges and honors the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Your host for this evening's series is the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. Our mission is sustaining managed and natural ecosystems and the human spirit through plant research, education, and display. Our gardens include the Washington Park Arboretum and the Center for Urban Horticulture in Seattle, Washington, including the Union Bay Natural Area, the Elizabeth C. Miller Library, and the UW Student Farm. We offer education and conservation programs that serve our entire region. Tonight is the third session in our 2022 speaker series called New Directions in Public Gardens. And this is a series of conversations exploring how gardens like ours can evolve to meet community needs today and in the future. We recognize the colonial history of plant collections and the implicit and explicit exclusion of BIPOC communities from green spaces like public gardens as injustices that shape our past and present and must be countered as we move into the future. So we're excited to dig into these conversations to learn more about community-led efforts in our region. We're going to have a few words of introduction this evening. We will hear a presentation from our guest speaker about the work that they're involved with, and then we'll have a good amount of time for Q&A and discussion. So tonight's session will focus on efforts involving environmental justice, community engagement, and job training programs. Future sessions will discuss our local urban food systems and the people of color-led community land conservancy. We may hear about that a bit tonight as well. That is acquiring land for parks in historically underserved communities. We want to use this series to make connections, to highlight the work of these organizations, and to explore how public gardens can engage with and support these efforts. I want to express gratitude to our partners at the Arboretum Foundation for their support in the development of this series. And introduce myself, I'm Jessica Farmer. My pronouns are she, her, and I supervise the adult education programs and communications at UW Botanic Gardens. Let's see. As far as Zoom goes, let's see, are we on? We'll get on to that. So we will be keeping your microphones and cameras off, but using the Zoom tools for discussion today. We have enabled the auto transcription for closed captioning. You can click on the CC tool button at the bottom of your screen and choose to show or hide the subtitles. And you should see the Q&A and the chat tools at the bottom of your screen. We'll be using the Q&A for questions for our speakers. And so you can submit questions at any time, and we'll have ample time for addressing those at the end. You can also use that if you have questions for me or if you need any technical assistance. And then we also have the chat open as a place for community conversation, for kudos, and a place for you to record your thoughts. So we just ask that everyone keep it respectful in the chat and choose to use these conversations as an opportunity to move toward healing and creating action. We do have a few community agreements for our series. You can see those on the screen here. We are working to find comfort in discomfort, recognizing that it's normal to feel discomfort while exploring racial and social inequity. And while learning and discussion may not get any easier, your ability to engage in more meaningful conversations will expand. So we encourage you all to be courageous and courteous and stay engaged and participate in these conversations. We encourage you to practice mindful listening and try to avoid planning what you're going to say as you listen to others, and really listen with your whole self. And then also to expect and accept non-closure. So there's no quick fix. The more we discuss, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more appropriate and promising our actions and interventions will be. So with that, let's see. Oh, one more announcement. We are recording tonight's session. So tomorrow I'll send out an email with a link to the recording to everyone who is registered to attend. And we'll also be posting the recording to our website, and I'll send that out in the email. Okay, so with that, I'm going to take down my screen share and I'm going to introduce Maylin Plummer. Maylin is the director of the Idea Center for Public Gardens and is here with us to share a little bit about the center and the purpose of this series. And we appreciate your involvement and support too. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you so much, Christina, as well. And welcome, Paulina, to this evening. I'm really thrilled and happy to be a part of this collaboration with UW Botanic Gardens on this lecture series. I had the great fun of participating in the first session. We really talked about public gardens and the necessity of this work in inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, which then talked about a little bit more about what we are doing with the Idea Center. So hopefully if you didn't see that, you can go back and watch the recording of that session to learn more about that work. But also then welcome to everybody as we continue this lecture series. My role here is really just to kind of help us settle in a little bit and then just talk about the intent of the series or provide a reminder for those who have participated in previous sessions. So with that, the first thing is just helping us settle in here. We all have very busy days, and I don't know about you all, but sometimes you're just kind of skidding in to from one meeting to the next. So just take this moment to take a deep breath and just be here. You are here in this place, in this time. And I think sometimes it's really comforting just to know that I just get to be here in this moment and that I don't have to be anywhere else. And that it's also just a wonderful experience just to listen to others. And I find that relaxing as well as stimulating. So in this work, we talk a lot about creating space for safety, conversation, possibilities. But I think in choosing to be here, we are also intentionally creating space, right, to be here and to continue onward as change agents. So for that, we celebrate you. Thank you for being here. One of the things I think is important to do whenever we have large group gatherings, and even though we can't really see one another, is just to take a moment to just be aware that there are others in this space and know that we're here with different intentions. And I would argue that they're all good intentions. We have differences in why we are here, how we learn, our comfort zones, how we approach change. We are a mosaic of truths, experiences, circumstances, perspectives, opinions, abilities, identities, just ways of understanding. And we each belong to not just one group or identity, but in actuality, many. So I really believe that this series creates a space of possibilities and opportunities, seeds that cultivate the world that we want to create. So for the intent of this series, and I think that this will resonate with all of you, and it does with what is really behind the Idea Center for Public Gardens and what we're doing there. We have just several intents and several goals, and I just want to resurface those for you. Number one, impact. We all want change in many different ways. And so with all of you that are here, I think that you're already taking that step, right? But what we really want is greater number of people and organizations, not just showing up, but prioritizing and activating work around inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We're here to enrich learning that deepens awareness, builds knowledge, and gives us language to form really authentic connections, and perhaps displace some assumptions and biases. Comfort with discomfort, as Jessica mentioned earlier. as we become more self-aware through these conversations, we take steps to seek out the edges of our learning and those comfort zones. And that ultimately it shifts perhaps this discomfort into more playful curiosity and the possibility of celebrating our differences and distinctions instead of disparaging them. And I know that right now, and a lot is going on in the world, it is easy to disparage our differences and place blame and shame. But ultimately, we need to look at these distinctions and these differences perhaps in another light. Because what's really important here is connection. And that is the last item here, right? It's a community of shared experiences and intense stories that really ripple beyond our organizations and us. And that really also continues to activate intention. So with that, let's begin.
Thank you, Maylin. And now I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker this evening, Paulina. Paulina Lopez is Executive Director of the Duwamish River Community Coalition. Paulina has over 25 years of experience working on issues of civil rights, social environmental justice, equity, education, and diversity. Paulina is keenly in tune with the strengths and challenges of this community as it moves towards environmental health and social and climate justice. She's a highly regarded organizer, facilitator, community and policy strategist, movement builder, focused on building systems of power and shifting power outward to those most impacted by injustice and oppression. Paulina has consulted with governments, organizations, community, and foundations to identify ways to shift power dynamics and develop frameworks for collaborative co-creating and transformative governance. So through this work and her leadership in social, environmental, and racial justice organizations, Paulina has developed expertise in multi-sector stakeholder engagement, networks, collaborative problem solving, and building power with BIPOC communities of color, immigrants, and refugees. Paulina immigrated to the US from Ecuador and has made Seattle her home for the past 18 years. She first joined the Duwamish River Community Coalition as a volunteer, advocating for her community for access to a safe, clean environment for South Park's families. And she holds a master's degree in human rights law from St. Thomas University. So we're very excited to hear about what you have to share tonight and have a conversation this evening. Thanks for joining us, Paulina.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for that wonderful, warm introduction, and Mike for that thoughtful way to start this session. First of all, I want to thank you all, University of Washington, Botanic Gardens, and all of our attendees who are here today present in this hot, warm day. They still get some time to be enjoying this conversation, learning, and I appreciate that so much, that the effort to come and listen a little bit of the story and history on our Duwamish River Valley community. So I am going to share the screen as I have prepared a presentation for you all, and I hope technology bear with us. Just thumbs up that it's working, hopefully.
It's working.
All right.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Now I'm going to go away now. So
Perfect.
We'll see you in a little while.
Don't go away. Stay there. Well, again, thank you so much for having. I am the Executive Director for the Duwamish River Community Coalition. And just a little bit, of point of context here for our organization was created in 2001 when the Duwamish River was declared a Superfund site. So that means when I moved here to the Seattle area, I didn't know what Superfund means, and I always got confused with Superfund, which was actually the total opposite. Superfund means that one of our Duwamish River is the only river that is in Seattle, but is also one of the most toxic rivers in the nation, and now has to be overseen by the EPA cleanup, and we work in parallel with them and responsible parties to make sure that we are bringing the awareness to communities so they can have a say in the cleanup of this river. That's how our organization got got created. But before I go any further in explaining, I did also wanted to ground us and think about how wonderful the resources that we live around into this state in Washington state with the water, the access, and how the water is healer, the water is connector. As we know, all water connects, but also it has been some harm made by humans to this beautiful water and the access that we have to the land. So I always like to, remind ourselves how our beautiful river used to be meandering and curvy and bringing the resources for time immemorial for the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people. And so we have a rich history, and it has been a central part of what now is considered the Seattle area. And all those economic benefits that this city has have been developed in the backyards of the people that were like me, that we live in the Duwamish Valley area. And yet some of these contributions that we have made have not been seen back into how much we have bringing into this economic development, but they haven't paid back yet. I always want to reemphasize, and thank you, Maya, for grounding us and where are we standing. But of course, this is the land of the Coast Salish people, and we always are going to be honoring our ancestors and reminding ourselves of the wonderful history that exists, but also of the injustices that exist as well, as one that the Duwamish tribe has not been recognized as a federal tribe, even though we know the history. And if you have not yet read The River That Made Seattle, the book that just came out from BJ Cummins, that actually works for the University of Washington, I highly recommend for further history review into the river and also into the history of the Duwamish tribe. But this is how it looked in 1892, a peaceful home for the Duwamish tribe, where our Duwamish River was considered, like a main source for fishing, for bringing the wealth, the peace, the habitat into the Duwamish people. But now this is the way it looks now. It's not. It's not considered a very panoramic view if you come to a boat tour, but it has so much history that it is so much to tell about. One of the most beautiful sites where we are actually converging with many different names of the river, starting with the Mount Rainier, which is the same river and just becoming Black River, the Green Duwamish, and then the Duwamish River, which is the same and coming to the Puget Sound. And then one more visualization of how our river used to look in the mid-80s and what man can do to bring more capitalism and more power. That's what it was needed. And so it was straightened for the purposes of bringing all that maritime industry. And of course, we're not against industry. We're just making people aware that this was not the real how the river was natural. So our Duwamish River Valley community, of course, is a resilient community that has been living here. The community was here first prior to the industries. And I always like to remind that, as many of the government or even the industrial area have not remember that when they are doing the practices of not protecting the people that have been here since time immemorial. Our organization was created with the mission of elevating those impacted by the pollution of the Duwamish and other environmental injustices that you can imagine. When you live in a community with a Superfund site, we also have the lowest tree canopy in the area, even though the airport passes by us, we have the trains passing by us, and we are a main freight corridor to serve the port, and given the big percentage of people of color living in our area, that is considered environmental racism and what we call also environmental injustices. So we wanted to make sure that as we are advocating for a clean river, we're also addressing all the other injustices for clean, healthy, equitable environment for the people that live here and also for our wildlife. And as we are doing all this, we didn't want to create the unintended consequences of displacing people or displacing our wonderful habitats. So we do the work that we do, making sure that it's going to suit a community capacity and the resilience that we have. This is our platform, and I always like to remind our people that live here, but also the people that need to understand more about our organization, that we have a platform that is embarking in how these 4 pillars in bringing a safe environment, how important it is to eliminate all that exposure, the focus on the placekeeping, that we can bring that capacity to the community by involving our youth, which I will talk in a little bit, but also meaningfully engage them in the growth and the changes that come to this community, including, of course, the big percentage of youth that we have in this community, as well as making sure that we're supporting government decisions, and those decisions are being made by us, the people that are directly impacted by it, and nobody else. We tend to only think that there is only one river. The community of the Duwamish Valley, even those 2 different neighborhoods, we see it as one community. Georgetown and South Park are both different neighborhoods demographically, but we suffer from the same environmental injustices. And then we call it one home because that's how we have this place have been a welcoming space for immigrant communities for many years, starting with Japanese, Italians. Now we have a big percentage influx of Latinx community, as well as East African community, and we all live under the same, and therefore we protect each other. Our work, this was just a little visualization that even though, what is the Duwamish River Community Coalition that oversees the river cleanup and works with community around it, we see the many intersections that we have. So of course that we are there protecting the river, but also doing a stewardship events to make sure that we are caring for our land and for the events that the caring for our water. But when the pandemic hit, for example, we also have to turn our mission and start bringing into the first needs of community, such as food, rental assistance, awareness, and education about how to be safe about COVID and health. Because for us, the root causes is something that we have been, working with community, identifying all those, and it always goes back to the health inequities that we have. And then, when we think about why are these inequities coming, of course, as I mentioned, we are surrounded by airports. We have the lowest tree canopy. We don't have too many gardens that people can do because of the contaminated soil that we live in. And also we don't have like the same access that other neighborhoods have for green spaces to recreate, but also let alone to recreate, to grow and to bring these food justice into their own families. And then, but we also have a thriving community. And so how do we mix all these injustices and take advantage of all these other increasing, values that we see in community, as we're trying to make it bright, vibrant, thriving, acknowledging the history, bringing also, we don't like talking only about the bad, but we do have homes. And it just happened. I thought you'll be interested in this, but last Sunday, Georgetown, the neighborhood, bring together many people from all over Seattle to do the Georgian Garden Walk, and where many of the neighbors care for us. And it's a way of healing as well, to bring those gardens and to show that there's also positive healing gardens and nature that you can also enjoy. And also to bring the awareness, like that we, even though we have these lack of open spaces, we try to make the best out of it and make sure that, our youth, our communities, as majority being people of color, have access to the river, because the river is here for us. And many of our youth have said, Miss Paulina, it's so sad to see the river and it's like a piece of chocolate you cannot eat. Like everybody want to have access to, and so we all dream of a river that could be fully clean for people to recreate, to fish, and to enjoy. Like in a day like today, how many people would like to be enjoying and swimming, like many other neighborhoods having access to water? Um, I wanted to show one of the creations that our youth have here locally. And when we talk about the Duwamish Valley Community Anxiety, like of the many different burdens that unfortunately we see on the day to day. Oh, look at those trucks passing by my street. Where can I take my kids for a safe bike ride? Because there is no bike trails around this. Look at all those industry gases. Like this is in one thing, in one day, everything that you can do. And how do we grow into this community anxiety is where we want to address it by bringing people in their own solutions and bringing themselves those recommendations of how we can see the change. But we do have all these different environmental burdens that we try to tackle. So we work in 2014 with the University of Washington and a nonprofit called Just Health Action into these cumulative health impact assessments, where a total of 15 indicators were put into a formula to see, let's compare like our zip code 9A108, which is South Park, Georgetown, and some parts of Beacon Hill, and see how other zip codes in the Seattle area compared to our zip code 908, and we can firmly characterize it with disproportionate health impacts, to the point that we can distinguish into all these needed to health inequities that we need to address, and which brought us to the main information that unfortunately we are, even though 10 miles apart, we still have 13 years, 1-3, of life expectancy difference. This is a little bit unreal still to me, that, in a city that is full of wealth, that is full of opportunities, this disparity existed and still exists because of the inequities. And when Maya was talking about, yes, we all may have access to the water, well, exactly, but not everybody has the same access and the thriving into having healthy around health equity around them. So because of all these disparities, we still see this expectancy that is so different, and why is not a coincidence that the majority of people that are being impacted are people of color. So we continue to do the work together to face these systemic inequities. And so we prioritize doing education as a big part of what we do, not only for the local community, but this is why I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to talk to you all. Because even though is the only river that we have in Seattle, everybody, not only the people that are impacted, should care for it. Also because people who live in Seattle should help us be in the collective to help us advocate for better practices, so we can reduce those level of pollution, so we can have better access to green spaces, so we can have those who are kept accountable for creating these injustices. So what we have started to do a big campaign is like, how do we address those root causes, and how do we bring those systemic changes and environmental changes and immediate reactions that we have with community? Because what we want is really to turn the curve. We don't want to just utilize false solutions to say, okay, well, we were going to allow the polluters to continue polluting if they continue to pay for if they pay some extra money for communities. But no, we're working in the root causes, like, and we know that, for instance, concrete steps, but also accountability for those who are bringing these inequities to support the communities like ours. So we did an exercise with community about this, like where do they see, what is, why are the levels of asthma and children hospitalization rates so high in the Duwamish Valley? And of course, the community is like, okay, well, it's because we're next to the highways. We don't have access to healthcare because the policies are not really meant to protect us. Or, well, also the city is not meant to be putting systems in place to do reportings, and the lack of representation for us. that is kind of what we see, like it's been so hard to turn the curve. And that's where I see people in the academic world, in the research world, as well as those decision makers, and just people at at large, community at large, to bring the awareness. And how can we turn the curve by looking into making those specific changes. When we think about why does Sophia, for example, have asthma in the Duwamish Valley, it's all these cumulative things, right? Oh, because there is no park or safe spaces in her neighborhood. Plus, she doesn't have access to lack of trees and vegetation. Look at also those emissions from industries and the workplace exposure. And so how all these different racial discriminations, so redlining, from the factors like further exacerbating for by the equity gap in the city and regulations, as I said. But it's only a demonstration of why we need to look and work in the root causes of what has created this. So this is a little more in like how are we embracing the complexity of creativity, and then breaking those institutional barriers that exist that has not allowed us yet to make those changes. Working, in our organization, sometimes in the meetings that we see, we still see how those institutional barriers are not really designed for us to be making these huge changes. And we have to deal with the Environmental Protection Agency. We have to deal with Washington State Department of Ecology. It's just the bottom line is they don't understand environmental justice, and we don't think it's for us to teach them. But it is time now that everybody's talking about equity, discrimination, about breaking barriers and structures. It is the time to be making sure that every effort is being community centered and that equity is at the center of every decision. Many of the governments are talking about how they care for it, but they really are not walking the talk, and they're not investing where the needs are the greatest, or building relationships with those communities to support that capacity or elevate the community decision making, which we identify as working with community is the transformation that needs to happen in co-creation, because we believe in intersections. Like, why am I talking here about the river, and why are you interested in gardens, or why are you interested in trees? For us, everything relates to health and the health inequities. And sometimes that is it's not understood by people that are making the decisions for us instead of involving us. So because of we're been working with the community, we have been putting together a group of about 40 different stakeholders, and we identify some of those strategies. What are you doing about it, the RCC? Like it's where do you start when you have a work like this, and where do you start when you have so many different things to tackle? And of course, the community is prioritizing right now as the river is getting clean. That is going to take more than 20 years again. In the meantime, we need to also deal with our pollution, air pollution. So we, after 2 years of doing a result-based accountability method, we were able to identify our main indicator, which was let's reduce Sophia's asthma hospitalization. We have in general the highest children hospitalization rates in the Seattle area. So what are the way that are we gonna get there? And what we wanted to do is, we realized that now is the time to be changing the laws to lower dairy pollution or emissions. But we need to work on those main causes, main goals, as well as improving indoor air in our schools. We have a local elementary school, majority living under the poverty line. How do we reduce those transportation emissions and lower pollution from airplanes and traffic trucks? And at the same time, we are increasing green space and community science for community healthy air. So we'll be working well, we have been working for the past 2 years, but now we are developing the timelines, the accountability with all the people that has to do with it. And you can see on the bottom is from King County, from the city of Seattle to Puget Sound Clean Air, who is the main regulator for emissions, and trying to put it all together and making everyone awareness of like the main goal, bringing those asthma rates to lower and down. The other part that we consider so important when we are working with communities like ours is everybody talks about doing community outreach and outreach. And I even that word, I every time disappointed, because there's different levels of how can you increase the level of community involvement. So outreach is the first step, but you want to go beyond. You're going to consult with community, then you want to involve community 100%. And sometimes that what we mean is we need to recognize people's time, and it takes longer and it takes more resources, but that is the right way to do, because what you want to see is some shared leadership and making participatory approaches in development of budgets and a strong partnerships with community, giving those resources and capacity to them. So then really we can be developing a strong community leadership and what we call community driven decision making. Communities need to be consulted, need to be brought up on the table right before any decision is being made, even in the planning, and not just tokenize them and by bringing people of color at the last minute just to show that you are caring for them, but it's not really showing this level on community involvement, impact, trust, and communication that we need to be successful. So in order for us to acknowledge this and ourselves practice, we have brought up with our Duwamish Valley Youth Corps, which has been created since 2015, and it's a way for us to involve all that important youth voices. So they are we have usually 3 cohorts a year, and then the summer program, but our main emphasis is, of course, to provide opportunities to our youth, to hear from them, their leadership, to be guided by them. They are the ones that are guiding our work, that they are the ones who we're learning from, what are the priorities from community, and creating this leadership that is not existent, that we don't see a representation anywhere where people are making decisions. So we have been working with them on restoration events, on planting trees, on organizing community forums that they help bring in their own awareness of what we think that we should be working on. That they have been the main ones explaining and understanding environmental justice or injustices and the way they see it, and the way they get to wonder themselves, how come our community doesn't have these beautiful parks as we go into another place, or how come a river cannot be used the way we wanted when we could, how come we don't have spaces to be bringing a food justice into our own homes and bring clean vegetables and food to the table. But that's what we emphasize and bring in our youth. We totally see the lack of representation. Now that we're talking about climate and that we have a climate justice platform, there is no way that we can be leading anything without their voices, and therefore they make a very important part of the program and the work that we do. Engagement as well, like how are we going to be able to accomplish our campaigns if not engaging with community? So we see different ways, and now with the pandemic, of course, it's been so hard to be able to engage outside, so we just look for ways to do kayak tours, to be outside, to set up tables where people were picking up food and talk about why is EPA trying to make decision of lowering standards of pollution while the pandemic is having place, and while people are just thinking of the other main things, such as bringing themselves food to the table. And so we using the creativity, but making sure that the most important part is the bringing them to the table at all moment. Meaningful consultation. So we started, now with technology, not everybody has access to it. So going to schools, Concord Elementary is our main school, but also bringing that awareness that we need to check in constantly on the prioritization of where should we be addressing our efforts, knowing that we have, like an octopus, different issues that we have to deal with, but the community is the one that is leading us. And it always comes to health. And we talk about climate, it comes to health. Do you care about pollution? Of course, because my kid has asthma. Are you worried about climate change? There's a pause there, but when we link it to what is going to happen, why is hotter here in the Duwamish Valley? Because we don't have trees. Then they start putting it all together. Yeah, that makes sense. My kid has been coughing more, or why are our stats in COVID are higher? Because we're more exposed to those pollutions. So it all everything comes to health. And involving in participatory actions, and how do we bring these decisions into be driven into the actions that we're going to take and that we're going to make. Washington State right now is, with we were big advocates together with Front and Center about the HEAL Act, which is bringing environmental justice into the different state agencies. And we're not there yet, but we do have hope that communities like ours, like the Duwamish Valley, that are also some representations in Eastern Washington, of course, once they will be defined like as communities that are being driven every decision, because what we need is really policy and systems change in the government in order to now really see changes. The funding that everybody talks about, the infrastructure funding coming from the White House, environmental justice changes are happening. Nothing is going to change unless our systems are being differently, being treated. People that and the day-to-day are dying, and this is a human rights issue because we don't have access to clean air, we don't have access to clean water, which are main things for you to be able to live a worth life. This is a quote that I really like. The hidden cost of racism, coming from UW educator Lindo, is that then it doubles up as a burden of having to pay the cure ourselves for the harm that we didn't even cause. And we see it every day. And we have to pay for it. And this is why it's so important that we have allies, that we have people like you learning more about the injustices that are just 10 miles, 5 miles away from you, and joining the collective cause to bring in this awareness and making sure that we're all working towards a healthy environment and health equity for communities like the Duwamish Valley. Thank you so much. And that is my contact information. Sorry if I went over time. drcc.org is our website. And we also are pretty active on Instagram and Facebook. We have events every weekend. We have no rest. We're always there. For instance, this Saturday, there's an opening of a park that we've been advocating for 20 years, but it's coming and it's going to be full of habitat. And we really are grateful for every community member that show up, but this just shows that slow process, they come and we need to celebrate them. And so this Saturday, we're going to be celebrating the opening of People's Park here in South Park. So if you're available, please come and celebrate with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulina. That was really fantastic to learn more about everything you have going on. I wanted to say that we will, in our email that we send out afterwards, we'll share information about the Duwamish River People's Park opening this weekend, which is a wonderful space, and also the book that you mentioned, and some of the other resources you mentioned along the way. And there's the website right there in the chat. Thank you. So I want to also invite Christina Owen to the conversation. Christina is director of the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. Hello and welcome. So we now have time that we just want to have a conversation. Questions from the audience are welcome to help us think about how organizations like ours can really be allies, be supportive in the work that you're doing and the priorities that you have. So Christina, is there anything that you want to say as you come on to join us?
Yeah, just I'm really grateful to you, Paulina, and the work of that you're doing with the Duwamish River. I think it's really clearly having an impact in the community. And one question that did come to mind is the area that you're talking about, I've noticed is becoming more and more gentrified over time. And I'm wondering how, if you've observed any impacts to your work as that area has become more gentrified, or just what that's looked like for the community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question, Christina. And indeed, that's why we updated our mission statement, because before it was mostly related our mission to oversee the cleanup of the river. And we expanded to make sure placekeeping is part of our main mission. And by that, I mean, we have been part of the creation of collective effort here in the neighborhood called the Duwamish Valley Affordable Housing Coalition. And what we're trying to accomplish is that all these changes that we're advocating for and that we're totally worth having are is not creating these unintended consequences of pushing people away. So in at the same time that we're doing these other changes, we've been knocking the door hard for bringing affordable housing. And I'm very happy to report that we have a couple, if not 4 great initiatives that are going to be coming next year of bringing affordable housing to the neighborhood, like about more than 300, 400 units. But it is a reality, and Seattle is insane expensive, and we have already been impacted by many of our wonderful neighbors that had to just leave because they couldn't afford the rent, and even the pandemic was hitting even harder on that. But what we really want is to prioritize that people, to bring them back if they will decide to do so, and give priority to those.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's a struggle that's seen across our city right now. And I really appreciate the way you're being really thoughtful and intentional about recognizing those impacts, because you can bring in parks, but then if the people that you've spent a decade or more building the parks for and building the healthy waterways for can't afford to live there anymore, get pushed out, you know, it doesn't.
And we never wanted to have communities say, we don't want more parks just because of the fear of gentrifying, right? Green gentrification. And I think you haven't shown what's in one of your series, but that's why we created the CLC, the Community Land Conservation, because no, we don't need to choose between parks and housing. We deserve both. We deserve clean, healthy parks and healthy living, but we also deserve affordable community-driven spaces and homes.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the Seattle Parks and Recreation has really shifted their strategy recently to focus more effort and more investment into parks and green spaces in the south end of Seattle. Are you starting to see the impacts of that at all? What does that look like for you?
Coming from Seattle Parks, I have not yet seen that. However, part of our strategy was also secure land. And right now, as part of our community, we are hoping to create a climate resilient district here in the Duwamish Valley. And one of those strategies is like securing land. And so we were able to secure through Seattle Parks and Recreation one of a Unity Electric site that right now it's a porta potty and it's a contaminated area to expand the park, and it's right on the river. So hopefully it's with that visioning of sharing a space like park and also serving other purposes of bringing a multi-purpose building for community organizations like ours, but most importantly, the youth, for children to be able to have access to the river and to habitat.
That's great. That's really wonderful to hear. We're a Botanic Gardens, and I often think about how the ability to garden in your own backyard is such a privilege, right? I mean, just even having the land, having the space to be able to do that, not many people do. And so as you're thinking about land access, are you thinking about garden access spaces to grow where people can safely, engage with nature and with green spaces and gardening in that way?
And that is the dream. And many of our community members coming from Guatemala, from Cambodia, they are already farmers, and they already are growing some vegetables in their little, spaces that they have. But so we have had so many thoughts about how do we allow for more community gardens, community, forest, that can allow for people to feel living in community, use the skills that they already bring from coming from farmer lands, but also creating that collaboration among neighbors. And as long as the soil is clean and being creative about that, like doing raised beds rather than putting them on the soil, because we know that majority of the soil here is contaminated. So how do we allow that, and how acknowledging that there's a lot of apartment complexes and they don't have the space to do that, but so these common spaces like these that I just mentioned, park expansion, could serve those purposes. Or even better, gardens on the roofs, which I've seen already happening, and that will be a dream, for this area, because it would protect canopy but also bring food justice to families.
Yeah, those things often go hand in hand, right? Environmental
Mhm.
justice, food sovereignty, land sovereignty. I think
Exactly.
it's in that intersectionality of all of those things that creates that the community of health that I think everyone is entitled to. So I think that's wonderful, and that's certainly something that the UW farm has been working with in these different sort of urban agriculture models, looking at what does it take to have a successful rooftop garden or a courtyard garden, and so I think it's really great to see those different things coming together.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that acknowledgement of intersections.
I've got a question here that's come in from an audience member, from Susan. Says she's excited to see such active involvement of the youth. How have you been able to excite interest with children? Is it through schools or other organizations? It's an area of concern how to bring them into horticulture and gardening and environmental causes in urban areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question, Susan. So our Duwamish Valley Youth Corps program, we were very hesitant because, it is not like the everyday thing that you do to keep that interest of children. And I have to say, because of funding, sometimes we have to not accept all the amount of kids that keep on coming. So recruitment has not been an issue, and we're super grateful for it. Number one, I think, is because we have the highest number of youth in the Seattle area, majority of youth of color, but also there is a lack of opportunities in the neighborhood. So not like other neighborhoods that have, jobs or pools or ice cream shops. Really, there is nothing for them to do. And so that is something that we needed to tackle, because we had a very big gang activity, and many of the youth, sometimes they just join because they don't have any other way to belong. And so we were trying to provide that way to belong in a positive way. So we also want them to create this sense of ownership. And, by planting the trees, we noticed that they were very proud of what they did. So I always remembered one of our youth passing by, and the tree that she planted has grown a little bit. And she told me, Miss Paulina, I'm so excited about this. Is every time I pass by this tree, I know my sister will have better health, and you know, it's just that sense of ownership that she developed, and she was so proud that she was able to make that change for a future generation. So I think it's very important that they themselves recognize that sense of ownership. And it also helps that our youth program, of course, we provide a stipend, and we couldn't just think of having them come, even though we offer also high school credits. And it's important to recognize that many of the youth support their families. Majority of their stipends went, for example, to rent payment during the pandemic. And we realized, you know, everything went right to pay the rent and support their families when they got to be fired from like the service industry. So it's definitely a plus to be able to do that. And we won't run any environmental justice program without recognizing their youth time.
That's great. You know, I was the continuum from outreach to really community-driven efforts that you showed made an impact on me, because we do hear a lot about outreach and prioritizing community outreach. And I wanted to think about see if we could generate some ideas, and I want to just give an example. So right now at our UW Botanic Gardens, we contract with the city of Seattle. We support the Trees for Neighborhoods program, which distributes 1,000 trees every year for folks throughout the city to plant in their yards. This year, we got a grant from the Seattle Garden Club to add 100 trees guaranteed to 98108 South Park in Georgetown. So we've been down there doing door-to-door outreach, but we've worked with Dirt Corps and with Duwamish Valley Youth Corps to help with that, to go engage with residents to try and find homes for these trees to increase canopy and kind of work towards addressing some of these health disparities in the neighborhood. So that's one example, but I'm trying to think of what other ways might there be for an organization like ours that's not based in the community, in the neighborhood, to have a positive, to do whatever would be of most use to you, right? To either support the work that you're doing, to share expertise, support the job training with jobs, that we have on our site, but it's not there in the neighborhood. Just thinking about what opportunities might there be.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that you are working with their core and our Duwamish Valley Youth Corps. And I think you're already exercising, a driven effort, community driven effort, because tree planting was already a priority for this community, because we understand the lower tree canopy that we have, and our youth have always prioritized, let's plant trees. I think what is important is that maintenance, the follow-up, and the understanding of the thriving for those trees, because it's easy to plant a tree, but are they surviving? Are they coming? And is the community involved with it? So just taking, that example of meaningful involvement, I think it would be great to also bring the youth, their core and community, and say, how can we keep this sustainable? And we know that it's successful, to make sure that the community is part of it and they are caring for it, and that there is enough resources and sustainability to make sure the canopy is indeed happening. So I would say you are doing already your great part of bringing youth along, which is youth from the neighborhood, rather than, but they are the best ones that know where the families live, what languages they speak. And I've been going in some of them, and it's beautiful to see them just knocking on the door and doing something positive, but also speaking their own language in some of the cases, and they know their neighbors. So is the best way to go and bringing this awareness and these resources to the community like ours. So thank you for doing that.
We hope to be able to grow on it, and I really appreciate that suggestion, because I think that's what also makes it more acceptable to somebody to jump in and engage in a program like that, is if they know that it's not just a short-term thing, but there is that longer commitment to helping them be successful. So that's great.
I have another question for you, Paulina. I saw that picture that you had of Jay Inslee signing a new policy, and I couldn't help but notice you in the background of that picture with Jay Inslee. And it struck me that you also mentioned that many of these issues are the product of policies, right? Redlining. I mean, it is policy to poison part of our city. And so, I think you also made a great tie to just what the consequences of these actions are and these policies are, that it's literally life and death. It's decades off of people's lives. This is that serious. And so I guess my question is, are you hopeful, and are you optimistic seeing these policies change? Do you see that moving in the right direction, or do you feel like we are still on a treadmill? And is there anything that people can do to try to push that policy change, to change those structural things, so that we don't have to keep kind of just always catching up and trying to prevent, that we can get in front of it and prevent poisoning of people?
Thank you for the treadmill. I do feel a lot on that we are in the treadmill. By the way, there is a lot of different things, good things that have happened that we need to keep on pushing for, that were not discussed or on the table before. So we do need to celebrate those discussions. Like before, environmental justice was never discussed in the Department of Ecology. It's going to take a while, but it's getting and it's shaking right there. And it's because I think there is a big environmental justice movement and lots of environmental justice leaders that we've been working for a long time to really bring this into a real policy change. If we're there yet, no. It's unfortunate, and I see it every day. I was so frustrated this morning because it's not anywhere where we need to be, but we need to celebrate that some things are being put on the table that they weren't never anywhere near. And then let's just not forget that we just ended a very bad government, federally, and those consequences we're seeing right now whenever we talk about environmental injustices, that when we were going forward, they were put backwards again. So, and now we have to deal with those consequences at this point. If I have hope, yes, I do have hope. I look at my youth, and the movement keeps growing. I saw a comment from one of the attendees about funding, and resources is important. Investing, put the money where your mouth is, type of thing. And the funders is, they need to change the way they're funding. And I think philanthropy is getting there, in the private philanthropy. Government, it's not, still so many bureaucratic systems to get access to this money. So a lot of the people that I've met with the city is like, well, now you have all this money coming from infrastructure. And I'm like, we're never going to see that money because the systems are not in place for communities like us to access to that funding. And so for me, is like telling the funders and telling, the philanthropy partners, you need to help the government understand how critical and oppressive the systems are. And, unless there is money and resources driven by community, we won't be able to make these changes, talking about resources, but policies. We need to change the law. The law is the only way that it's going to make a change. And we have seen in Oregon, they have way more restrictive law that is protecting people compared to Washington. So that's where we're heading, and that's where we are hoping to get. And I love the puppet. I have kids too, so.
Thank you. Yes, kids and cats.
I know, exactly.
All right, well, I think that we have gone just a little bit over 8 o'clock, so I think we will probably wrap it up there. I really appreciate your insights, Paulina. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We do plan to have a kind of a community workshop, little town hall style workshop at the end of this series in September, to really try and create some action plans around the ideas that have been discussed, so that we can find ways to really start to make some change. So to everyone attending, I think when you close out of this webinar, a little pop-up will come up asking you for what you'd like to hear about more as we have these conversations. And if you're interested in being a part of that meeting, that we'll have at the end of the series. And we just thank you all for your time this evening. Thank you again, Paulina and Christina, for being here, and all of our attendees. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. A pleasure to be here with you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the full moon tonight.
Yeah. Bye-bye.